So, as I promised, a short video on the written assignment. I think it would be a good objective for you in terms of negotiating your way through the whole module, to arrive at the workshop having given some thoughts to your written paper. The reason being is that the time available for you to start from fresh after the workshop and handing it in is actually quite small, and I think that you're probably better off getting ahead of the game, and this means spending some time now thinking about your written paper. Now, because we deal with application, illustration and reflection in the workshop itself, you can't go too far into your paper, but having a good sense of what you want to write about, I think, is a good objective. It's a good plan, and consequently I suggest that you arrive at the workshop having drafted, at least, I think, in writing, that is, draft it out in writing so that you can give it some thought and redraft it as you see fit after the workshop, but have something which is, you know, on its way to being completed before the workshop, and I'm referring specifically to parts A and parts B of the paper. So I'm going to go through the whole paper here, but I'm going to talk more about parts A and B, I think, although we'll see how it goes. All right, so you can see on the screen is that the final assessment, which is a 3,000 word paper, is worth 75% of your grade. So it's important. Okay. There are some activities and there are 8 topics before attending the workshop, and I think it's worth trying to achieve those in terms of the readings, but you don't need to do all of the readings. Remember, we've talked about focusing on the introductory elements to the papers, and it's the core readings, not the readings in totality, that I'm referring to here. So I think having spent some time going through the core readings and reading the introductory bits so that you understand those introductory bits, as opposed to the whole articles, is the goal here. Okay, so there's lots of stuff about what your paper should look like and so on and so forth, and the formatting. As long as I can read it, I'm not that bothered about it. I did once have a student that seemed to think that it was a competition to see if you could get the entire essay onto one page of A4. I just couldn't read it, so it's too small. So as long as I can read it and it's sensible, so that means be conservative and set it out in 1.5 lines and all that sort of thing. But you know, you've done all of this work, so help me out by reading it, okay? By giving me a format that I can read it in. You'd be amazed how many people don't do that. So what does it say? It says you're required to write a 3,000 word reflective practice paper. Where it says reflective there, it's reflexive as far as I'm concerned. There's a difference, and we'll talk about that in the workshop, using module concepts from our module. So you're going to use the concepts, the theories, the topics as a lens in order to be able to view your case study. So what I mean by that is that if you were to consider, you look at the world through a set of glasses, you know, spectacles, it looks differently, it looks clearer to you, unless you pick up somebody else's glasses, and then it changes. And if you've got glasses where the lenses are of a different color, it changes. So when we say use a lens, use the module concepts as a lens, what I mean is use those in order to be able to look at your issue. So you look through the concepts to think about your own issue. So setting out which concepts you're going to look at is important. Okay. Fuller explanation follows. We'll go through that. So you're looking at an issue, opportunity, or challenge you identify. It's relevant to you, and it relates to the concepts and principles of this unit. So it's about leadership. So we're looking at a leadership case study, in other words. Now you can interpret leadership case study in any way you see fit. You can be you as leader, you as follower, you as observer, you as a member of a team, but it needs to be related back to leadership, because that's what we're examining you on. And the concepts and theories are selected to that we've provided you need to be complemented by your own research and reading on that subject matter. Okay, so just using the module readings that I've given you is not going to be sufficient. Self-selected, self-driven, reflective practice paper provides you with an opportunity to examine a real issue, and we're aiming for it to lead into an improvement in your practice. Okay, so it should gain you some benefit. And then there's some other gubbins that's in there about what you shouldn't do. And yeah, I'm not going to bother with that. You can read that through at your own leisure. And there's 5 parts. Okay, so this is the important bit in it. First up, the delegate in work role. In this section, you're asked to pose. I promise I'm not just going to read this through. All right, you can do that in your own time. I'm going to read it through, then I'm going to unpack it for you. Delegate in work role. In this section, you're asked to pose structured questions about your current work role and appropriate experiences. It should include. Now, these are guides. Okay, these questions or these points here are guides to what you can think about and how you can include it. What you do is entirely up to you. But what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to provide me with a CV about how wonderful you are and how wonderful your company is and so on and so forth. This is a critical, objective analysis of an issue which is of personal relevance to you. Okay, so you need to set out in this section what the issue is. Yeah, so set out the issue and explain it. Unpack it so that somebody who's not familiar with your issue can understand the issue as you see it. That's your goal in here. It's not to tell me that you are the financial controller and you've got this, and there's so many people that work with you and the company does this and it's listed at that and it turns over and all the rest of it, because by and large that's not going to be relevant to the actual issue. So focus on the issue, not necessarily on the presentational aspects of it. Okay, and another part about here is that I think that at the end of this section is that you really need to have a statement about what the issue is that you're looking at, and if that's clear, then the rest of the paper follows on quite naturally from that. If that is unclear or it's ambiguous or it comprises 1,000 words, is that you're not going to be able to draft a paper and compose a paper that's going to be meaningful. So as an example of this is that you might say, well, I want to look at team leadership. Well, you look at team leadership and he says, well, and you make your statement. So, well, the team is ineffective, and I want to look at that. Okay, and that's my issue. Well, that's fine, but what about the team that makes it ineffective? What is it about the team? So you need to really unpack it so that we understand very clearly what the topic is that you're going to be looking at. Now, this does mean that in practice is that you're probably only going to look at a small element of the team or team leadership, but nevertheless, it's meaningful for you. And if there are issues that are more than one issue about the team, is that you can address those outside of doing this paper, because the process would be the same. The process of reflecting and thinking about the issue will be the same that you're going through in the paper. It's just that here what you're doing is that you're writing it all down. So part A, delegate and work role, it's not a description of your company and your job. It focuses upon the issue that you're going to analyze, and it unpacks it so that somebody who is not familiar with it, me in other words, can understand what the issue is. And it has a clear problem statement in it. And when I mean a problem statement, that's the issue that you're going to look at. Okay, so it's very clearly set out. And I would say make it nice and tight and manageable. Because if it's too broad, is that the literature that you're looking at is going to be is vast. Yeah, so look at something which is manageable and focused. All right, and that's what the section A should be about. There's also some stuff in here about how it should be written, first person, third person, and all the rest of this. To be honest, I struggle to care. I think that you should write in a way that is familiar to you. But having said that, this is not a report, okay? I know you can all write management reports, but this is not a management report. It is a reflective paper, which is not a complete academic paper, but it verges on it because we're expecting it to be in good English prose, right? And there's a difference between a report, which you all do, you can do very well. There's no point testing you on that, and a paper. And the difference is this, is that a management report invites inquiry, okay? It allows somebody that receives the report to ask questions of the report writer. So as a consequence of that, it might be a bit fragmentary, it might be clipped and uses lots of bullet points because you're trying to convey information in as quick a possible time as you possibly can do, and it works well for a report. Okay, a paper is not that. All right, a paper stands on its own 2 feet. All right, there is no opportunity for me to ask you questions about your paper. So that's interesting, that bullet point there. What does that mean? That doesn't happen. So it has to stand on its own 2 feet. I can only judge you on what you're going to write. Prose allows you to connect everything up. Bullet points and report writing doesn't. Okay. So just bear that in mind as that you're writing it, whether it should be in third person or first person or whatever. Sometimes I think that, you know, writing a paper in the third person, Paul did this and Paul did that, just sounds contrived and terrible. So if you wanted to say, this is what I did and this is what I wanted to do, that's fine by me. Because I think that the various bits and pieces of the various sections of the paper tend to lend themselves to a particular way of writing them, and I just want you to be able to express yourself and write in a way that you feel comfortable. Okay, so don't get too wrapped up in third person this, first person that, and all of that kind of like stuff. All right, so now we come to the second part. Yeah, second part, module concepts and principles, right? So for the avoidance of doubt, this is the theories that we've been talking about. Okay. But the study guides that I've given you and the readings that I've given you are never going to be sufficient for you to be able to adequately do your paper. All right. So
this conference will now be recorded.
So you're going to be required to do some reading because the papers that I've given you are not sufficient to be able to do section B adequately. So you need to do some reading and some research. But let me give you a little bit of a cheat in how you do this, is that the core papers that I've given you, for the most part, are reasonably old. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they are not good papers, because they're foundational. Just because they're old doesn't make them bad. Otherwise, we wouldn't read the classics anymore, would we? So if you start from a paper that you think is relevant, interesting. So as you know, is that I think this paper, The Management to Meeting by Smerchich and Morgan, is one of the most significant papers written about leadership in a long time. All right. So you can see that on here, because all I've done is that I've searched for the paper here in Google Scholar. Yeah, up there, look, you can see what I'm talking about, Google Scholar. So just if you've never used Scholar before, use it, because there's no real reason to go anywhere else, to be perfectly honest. Is that you would go just Google Scholar and it will take you to the Google Scholar opening page. So you go into Google Scholar and then you type in what you're looking for. So here you go, look, I've typed in management to meaning, and you can put the proper reference, full reference in there, but by and large you don't need to, just flick through it. And you can see that there is, they come up with Linda Smirchich and Gareth Morgan's paper. Now, you can go directly to this by just clicking on that, but you don't need to do that because we've already put it giving you a link to it there. But also, and this is the real cheat here, okay, there's this bit here, look, it says cited by 2369. What does that mean? That means that 2,369 subsequent papers have cited their paper, Smirchich and Morgan's paper. Now, if I click on it, it provides me with everybody that cited that paper, a list of them. And I can, because it can only, if it's cited by, then they've built upon their work, basically. So what I have got is I've got 2,300 references that have used Morgan's paper, Smirchich and Morgan's paper, which gives me a great start to starting to filter out and create myself a reading list. So would I need to go much further than this? Probably not, to be honest. Now, if there's no link to the actual papers that's provided here in terms of PDFs, go back to the library website and just put that new paper in it and see whether or not the library's got access to it. You can sort by relevance, sort by date over on this side over here, so you can actually give yourself, as I say, a really good, tailored and focused reading list to start you doing your research from. And all we've done here is what, 3 or 4 clicks. Now, if you went down to, look, there's one of the big hitters here, Vike's book on sense making. There's another 2,828,000 there. So you click on them, you're going to get more material than you know what to use with. So actually finding the material is not the tricky bit. The tricky bit is finding out whether or not it's relevant to what you want to do. So if you were to just click on one of the papers, I'll click on Smirchich's paper here, and it provides me with the abstract, and I'd read that abstract, and I would decide whether or not, at that point, whether or not I thought it was relevant. If it was relevant, I might save it, the URL. You can either save it as favorites or a bookmark or so on and so forth, in order for me to therefore to come back and read it at another time. Okay, but I will be looking to get between, for a master's paper, I would say between 8 and 15 good articles here. Okay, and that would be, when you aggregate them together, that's my lens that I'm going to use in order to be able to analyze this paper. So I think if you can get part B into a good looking shape by the time of the workshop, you've done a lot of the hard work. Okay, so it requires you to research more deeply. Although I'll challenge the word deeply, because you can do it, yeah, no, you can do it deeply, but you can do it easily. Gone are the days where you used to go to the library and try and find these things in terms of hard copy and copy them all out and wander around with kilos and kilos worth of references and papers and stuff like that. You don't need to do that anymore. Benefit of the internet. Fully understand the program concepts and principles appropriate to your issue that you're going to look at. All right. Now it says essentially it's a literature review, but it's not a literature review in the sense that you are for those of you who've been engaged in science, is that a literature review is pretty much everything that's been reported on your topic. You're not going to do that. You haven't got the time. This is social science, and as a consequence of that is that your literature review is going to be selective. It's not a literature review in the sense that I'm using this as the framework to write my paper for publication because I'm looking to the addition of new knowledge. So I need to actually set out what knowledge is. This is a framework of literature that has utility to you as a lens that helps you explain your issue. Now, it might well be that some of the literature has got gaps in it as far as you're concerned. Well, that's fine. You can draw attention to that. It might well be that bits and pieces of it are helpful. It might well be that other bits and pieces of it are not helpful. Well, that's fine. You can unpack all of that in the subsequent discussion about the issue. Okay. So it's a focused literature review of concepts and principles that underpin the unit, but your topic really, because you selected them to help you examine the issue, okay, which is in part A above. And again, it says take a critical perspective, and that means test the data, test the findings and the assumptions of the papers that you're going to look at. So that means that because you're not just describing it, so and so said, full stop, so and so said, and you're just giving me a raft of literature, is that at some particular point in part B, you need to bring them all together and again make a summative statement about what you think it says and how it applies to your issue. Okay. Now it's giving you a guide there in terms of the academic and professional journal sources. That's only relevant depending on the topic. All right. So if you're looking at, I don't know, you might use professional journal sources if you wanted to look specifically at, let's say, healthcare models of leadership. But don't feel compelled to squeeze professional journal sources in there if they're not relevant. So I think you're looking at between 8 and 15 sources for this. And then there's some questions, all right? And again, remembering that the questions are guides for you to help you think about them. They're not requirements. The requirement is that we are being critical in looking at the literature rather than just describing it. Okay, so part A and B, if you can nail that in not finished form, but in a good looking shape before the workshop, brilliant. All right, all is not lost when you come out the workshop if you haven't been able to do that or if you're floundering around. But the most important, to me anyway, the most important part is thinking about the issue and how you're going to define it, because everything else drops out of that. Okay. Style of B should be academic, whatever. So C, this is about linking your theory to practice. Now we'll do this in the workshop to an extent. No, we will. We will. And it's the core of the practice of your paper. So you connect A's and B's to generate new insights. How you can be more effective as a leader, how you can increase your own practice, how you can do the task that might be part of, which is to lead effectively, how you can lead more effectively, and how the literature helps you unpack the problem. Okay, and again, there's a series of questions, but A, state your problem, B, what's your lens, C, apply the lens to the problem. D, what did you learn? And you might also think about what implementation or changes that you might want to make. And I would also say give some consideration there as to how you might go about doing it. Okay, so what did you learn? What do you think about what you learned? How might you apply that? And how might you go about implementing it? And then E, the final bit, and I think this is this often, even though it's only a short number of words, this very often could be the most powerful piece of work that's in it, because it's a critical review of your process of doing the practice paper. So it's not a conclusion about about your paper. All right, there's the conclusion, to the extent that it exists, is in the key learning points, yeah, which is your implementation plan, or your what it is that you want to change and how you're going to go about changing it. Which is the reason that I'm hedging my bets with some of the language is because this brief is the same across the MSc. But for units or modules that are looking at the organization in terms of like strategy or marketing or finance, it's very clear to say what the implementation plan might be, because it's quite functionally orientated. It's difficult when you're looking at you as the object of inquiry, because what you'll get is there might not necessarily be a plan or an action plan that's going to come out of it. But what did you learn? How are you going to use it? And what you're going to do differently to get better is the way that I'd rather you think about it. And that leads, I think, into this bit here, this critical reflection. So it's a review of the process of doing your paper. So how that experiences has, or what that doing the paper has actually indicated to you about your leadership, not about doing the paper. So it's not so, well, I did this paper and really I should have done it earlier. Okay, that's a statement to the frickin' obvious. Is that I've done this paper and it's created some insights that actually I've found rewarding or uncomfortable or whatever it is. We'll write about those. So the aim being, what did doing the paper, thinking about your own leadership, which is in addition to the resolution of your case study, what did doing the paper bring to you? What conclusions did you make out there? And I think this is really about self. Okay, is that leadership comprises self and others, other variables. Well, this is really about you. So think about it in that respect. And again, there's a lot of questions that you can use there. And this is the last bit, and I'm going to conclude after this, because I know we've got other meetings to talk about this as well. Here is a guide as to the amount of words that you should use in each section. Now, I'm not going to count them. It's worth pointing out. And you get plus or minus 10% for the total. So you're looking at 2,700 words to 3,300 words. Now, let me be brutally honest about that. If you can't write 2,700 words about your own leadership, what are you doing on the program? So really, you're looking at trying to constrain it below 3,300 words. If you go over a little bit, don't worry about it. And if it's relevant and it's good, well-written prose, then going over it a little bit, that 3,300 words is not going to be too detrimental. If you're starting to drift into the high 3,000s and it's full of waffle, you can expect to get penalised. So that's just padding. So don't do that. So try and keep it to 3,300 words below, because by editing it and making it tighter, you're just making the whole thing much more convincing. Really, that's what you're trying to do, is that you're trying to convince the person who's reading it that you've lived these experiences, there's been some meaningful thought about them, and you've come up with some meaningful conclusions at the end of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily demand tens of thousands of words, okay? So there's some flex within this, but I think that what is important here is that you can see, because of the amount of words that are allocated to certain sections, that indicates you which the important bits are. So B, establish your lens. C, unpack it and apply it. That's where the important thing is. People tend to make a mistake because they've written a CV in section A, 1,000 words, and go, well, I haven't got many words left to do the rest of it. And so consequently they don't, because the CV is the important bit and it isn't, right? So that gives you an idea about how you should allocate your words. I was going to ask for any questions then, but that would be madness because this is a recording. So I apologise for that. So that's it at this stage, all right? We'll talk again about it. But in the meantime, workshop is what, 3 weeks away? You've got time to get stuck into your reflective practice papers. And I urge you to do that. Now, you can talk to me about topics, relevance of topics, but I'm not, as I've said before, I'm averse to people turning up saying, I'm thinking of doing X, what do you think? Asking me, what do I think? And usually my question to that one is, I have my master's degree, what do you think? Because I'm interested in what you have to think. Now, I'm happy to discuss, I'm happy to help you shape it, but I want you to do some work first. I want you to think about it. Okay. So on that basis then, I'll look forward to talking to you more roundly and more deeply and more in a more considered way about your reflective practice papers. See you soon. Bye-bye.